Hey, hon, I got one for you. What do you get when you plant your pollinators in the wrong place?
What do you get when you plant your pollinators in the wrong place?
And oops-a-daisy!
Welcome to Suburban Life Permaculture. We're so happy you're here. I'm Holly, and today we're going to talk about how you can accidentally kill your plants and how you can avoid that. And believe me, we have made probably every single one of those mistakes a few times. One of the biggest mistakes you can make is planting at the wrong time of year. I learned the hard way. What I was used to when I lived in Michigan with my folks was that when you go down to Florida, you don't necessarily plant in May or April to get the same kind of results. So that would be number one. You want to know when to plant for your area. Speaking of area, let's talk about zones. So number one, you want to make sure you're planting things for your zone. And there are a lot of varieties out there where one variety does well in a lower zone and another variety will do better in a higher zone. And speaking of zones, you want to be mindful of which type of zone you're looking at. For people in the United States, that's the USDA growing zone. But it might be different in another country. Canada's different from us, who's different from the UK, different from Australia. So you want to keep all of that in mind when you're thinking about zones and you're looking at plants you'd like to grow that are being grown in another country, and they talk about the zone, and you're like, oh man, I got the same zone, I could grow that plant. Please do research, or you're going to end up almost certainly with some dead plants. Now, we are in zone 9AB. We can grow things like cranberry hibiscus, and we know for most part it will come back from year to year. Same thing with our longevity spinach. For the most part, we know they're going to come back year after year, even though we hedge our bets by making cuttings so that we have them ready for the next year should we not be able to do that. But does that mean that people in other zones can't grow these plants? Honestly, do an experimentation, but you want to assume that they are going to die over the winter. So I would say where I hedge my bets and make cuttings, you plan for these perennials in the higher zones who do well there might not make it through the winter, so you just assume when you grow things like this, like cranberry hibiscus and longevity spinach, you are going to plan for them to die off. So that's when you're going to make cuttings, baby them over the winter, because you know these are going to be annuals most likely in your zone, and you're just prepping for the next season. Every year you're going to prep those plants for that next season because you're fairly certain, and you can experiment of course with what's left, see if you can winterize them to get them through the next through the winter, or like I do, you do both, right? If you think it's not going to make it, you winterize it, and still you make some cuttings or save seeds so that you know that you're going to have that plant again in the next growing season. Here's another little oops-a-daisy. When you have things in pots, sometimes the roots will actually start growing out of it, and you want to make sure that your husband doesn't just yank the whole plant out and leave their poor little roots behind. We now have a sad papaya. He just wanted to move it over And now it's quite possible that it's going to die. What I'm going to do to hopefully rescue it is to cut off some of these poor little leaves here in an effort to help it avoid some of this shock that it's going through. So let's talk about ways you can avoid killing your plants before I tell you about this next part. So the biggest ways you can do, it can avoid plant-icide is number one, research, and number two, experimentation. So what I have here is a little bit of that experimentation. What I know about Cuban oregano and longevity spinach is that they like partial shade, and that's kind of their happy place. But what part of my yard are they going to be the happiest? Well, that's where experimentation comes in. So if you look here, we have 3 trellises, and here's our longevity spinach and some Cuban oregano right here. Now, I want you to compare that, because this area, this trellis, gets a little bit more sun than this next area. So if you come back this way, than this trellis. Now, look at the difference of this longevity spinach. I haven't even yet had to train the other one, and here I've trained quite a few of these plants. And look at the difference of the Cuban oregano, right? It is so much more vibrant. So this gets a little bit more shade. That tells me a little bit more information, right? So now, let's look at this other area that has both of these plants. And mind you, there are some other variables, like how well they were able to get through the winter, but for the most part, they were all planted at the same time. Now, check out how incredibly huge this Cuban oregano is. And I actually trimmed it back yesterday, so it was much more expansive, tall and wide. Now, I want you to also look at, because it's really hard to see, this is some more longevity spinach. See the difference there? So this is what it's telling me. Cuban oregano likes a little bit more shade than our longevity spinach. But both of them do fairly well right about this place. Although the Cuban oregano does much better over here. So that's why you're going to want to do some experimentation, even though you've done your research. So we just talked about putting things in the wrong place based on sun. So let's talk about the other element of wrong place. There's another thing when it concerns water issues. So this particular plant, this is an olive tree, it does not like wet feet. It would be really unhappy in a place that got a lot of water. In fact, that's why this modified one rock dam, where we've put our decorative bricks here, to make that we have spaces here and not over next door where our mulberry tree is. This one is not going to be happy. This is why we have rocks here at the foot rather than mulch. We want to make sure that it gets plenty of water, but it doesn't sit in too much water and then be very unhappy about that. There are some plants that absolutely love to have wet feet. Sisu spinach is a prime example. That one would love to have extra water and a lot of shade and things like that. So you want to keep in mind those elements as well. The next thing you want to be mindful of is the short-term and long-term needs of plants. So if I were to create a guild for this olive tree, part of that would be thinking about what these plants that I'm going to put with it, what is their short-term needs. This does not have enough shade for a lot of plants that would be happy here. You might want to start with a gill that is okay with more full sun and eventually replace that gill with things that like more shade as this gets taller and floofier and more shade. Do you have any advice about how to avoid plant-icide? Let us know in the comments below. We'd love to learn more. We love learning new things. And I don't care if you like, subscribe, or share. You do you. Carpe diem, y'all.